Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to the JJ Dillon podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz, and with me, as always, is the star of the show, two-time Hall of Famer, the leader of the Four Horsemen, the second greatest manager of all time, former WWF and WCW executive, James J. Dillon. JJ, how are you doing this evening?
Great. Good to talk with you.
And for today's topic, we will go back to the WWF once again, the mid-90s, and we're going to be talking all about the Kliq. Of course, talking about the Kliq, the Backstage group in the World Wrestling Federation during the mid-90s when it was Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Sean Waltman, the 1-2-3 Kid. Of course, there were other quiet members like Aldo Montoya, a.k.a. PJ Polacco, but we're really going to be focusing on Hall, Nash, Michaels, Levesque, and, of course, Sean Waltman. What is kind of the first thing that pops in your mind when I mention the Kliq in the WWF in the basically the mid-90s?
You mentioned all of the key players, all the key names, and it's really the Four Horsemen was a legitimate grouping of people. I say often imitated and never to be duplicated. And I'm not saying that the Kliq was an imitation of Horsemen, but it was similar in that there was again a group of guys that enjoyed each other's company and made appearances where they were all there and. I had a chance to be around them too. They were all friends and guys that I respect.
And it's interesting. This is more backstage, not so much in front of the camera as far as a cohesive unit. Really, later on in their career, would they be known for the NWO and the DX and kind of real factions kind of come out on screen. But this was more of a backstage, which is so interesting. When you start becoming a smarter fan, you start learning more stuff, listening to shoot interviews, reading a lot of books, reading some dirt sheets and some newsletters and things like that. You find out about this backstage group that was full of politics and why they kind of formed and how they formed. What was your kind of first inkling that okay, these guys are all friends, but they're all getting together as far as the Kliq and they're going to kind of form their own maybe backstage group, maybe for politic reasons or for whatever other reasons?
I can't put my finger on one specific date or a venue where it seemed to be the case, but and it was like all of a sudden you realized that when you were seeing one, you were likely in many cases to see them all much like the situation with the Horsemen. So I knew that as part of the Four Horsemen, we had a genuine camaraderie. We were close to each other. Friends knew that even though we were scattered in terms of where we lived and the lives we had, that if there was ever a situation where somebody had an hour of need, we were just a phone call away. That's how close our relationship was, and. I think the Kliq kind of was very similar to that. They were guys that, again, all of a sudden you would see one, you would see them all, and again, similar to us, they enjoyed the company of each other.
Now, the one thing that I always thought was interesting and really stuck out when you hear stuff about the Kliq is they were the first guys. I mean, I could be wrong, but they're really the first guys to kind of come out publicly and really talk about it. But maybe the first guys that kind of got together and were like, hey, what's your paycheck? What's your paycheck? What'd you get paid? And obviously, we talked about in prior episodes, you were the one kind of handing out a lot of the payments and saying what the percentages and what their cut is for the game, what the cut is for the show. So was that the kind of some of the first time you heard guys really openly talking together about what you were paying them?
Probably was, because in the wrestling profession, even though there was like the Horsemen was looked at as a unique grouping of guys, we were still all individual contractors, And the same thing with the Kliq. It was just the same idea. That now, if they shared their income and what their payoff was for any particular event or something, that was unusual, as it was with the Horsemen. And of course, Flair was the head of our grouping for a while. And Rick, as champion, was paid very well, and it was accepted within the industry that whoever was the reigning NWA champion often got a percentage of the gate, which was not the norm for anybody else. The longer you were around the business, you understood that when you went to an arena, if it was not a big house, whether it was just the size of the town, the fact that there was a problem that week, that maybe the TV show got preempted, and that could easily have an effect on a town. And you could look out there and see what was there and have some idea of an approximation of what your payoff would be for that night. And you've been around the business as long as I have, and the other guys, you for the most part, you were very close, and you knew whether it was a fair compensation for what you could see was out there in the house, and everybody that's on the card knows that for the most part what drew the house. And at the same time, mostly everybody started at one point at the bottom of the bottom rung of the ladder, and you had to pay your dues for the most part. Even Flair, to a degree, though he fast tracked in terms of his box office appeal and thus his his income. So Rick, and Rick, to his credit, was different from a lot of others in that he also heavily invested in his career. Now, as independent contractors, you choose your own gear, you buy your own gear, you pay your own gear. But Rick took it an extra step, and I met him after it all started in the Carolinas, and George Scott was there at the time. But Rick actually bought a limousine and hired a driver with a chauffeur's outfit and drove him to town. And Rick was smart enough to realize that it was worth the investment because he had a lot of confidence in his own ability, and it really set him apart from everybody else that, Rick shows up in a limo and has a driver, and, there's a lot of fans that come early and wait outside to see the wrestlers as they arrive. And, you had guys that, drove a Mercedes or a Cadillac, and you had guys that drove a Buick, a Pontiac, and a Chevy as well. So because you're independent contractors, and some guys were very, very cognizant of their image and didn't want to be seen by the fans, pulling up at the arena in a Chevy. They wanted to, because of this concept of an image. I've referred to it as the myth that people see you on television and think that, well, you're on TV, you're a huge star, they must be paying you a fortune, you're rich, and so the expectation is, something wrong with the thing. If you're a guy that pulls up in a Chevy, they expect you to be if not in a limo, certainly on a high-end car.
Now, Flair, there's no doubt, was kind of the clear-cut leader of the Horsemen as far as the wrestling end of it was concerned. As far as the Kliq, really it was Diesel who kind of separated himself from the pack in '94 when he becomes the world champion and holds the title for almost 365 days before eventually losing it to Bret Hart. But as far as Diesel, what were your thoughts of him winning the title? Did you think that was kind of good for that time, bad for that time? What was the thoughts on him as world champion in the WWF?
He was worthy of carrying it. He certainly had the size, certainly had the athletic ability. He had, to say a drawback would be a bad choice of words, but typical to a lot of guys. He had played professional basketball for a while in Europe, and as a result of all that, had bad knees. And there's guys like Bill Goldberg was another guy who had a pretty good football career, but then suffered some knee injuries. And you could go ahead and make a name for yourself and have a pretty good career in wrestling, even working with knees that weren't 100%.
What did you think of him as champion as far as drawing and basically being the figurehead or the lead guy for the WWF in that time period?
Diesel did a good job. He, like I say, he understood the business. He was a businessman in terms of me working in the office and having to interact and do business with him. Never had a problem with him. He was all business, and again, he had everything. All the boxes were checked off. He had the size, he had the experience, he had the athleticism, and was one of the outstanding legends and stars in our profession.
Now, creatively, when that kind of comes up and says, okay, who we putting the title on next, who is going to become the next world champion, what's the thought process on him, like from Vince? Vince just says, like, okay, I love this guy's size, I love his look, let's put the title on him. Or is there something more that goes into it? Like, okay, he's huge, we're getting away from the steroid guys, he's just a huge, massive guy. We still want to be larger than life.
I think that was part of it. That certainly the size was a great asset for Kevin that set him apart from most other guys. But he wasn't just a big guy; he was a big guy that could go out and perform. And as far as a guy that's a champion, most promoters, give extra perks to a guy that's at the top of the card and the champion. And they're paid better and receive a lot of perks in terms of, they're more apt to get some time off than where other guys are having to hit the road with greater frequency with not many days off in order to make a decent living in the profession.
When he wins the title, he beats Backlund at MSG in about 8 seconds. It was one of the quickest title wins of all time. I mean, they really kind of not went out of their way, but MSG is it's New York. It's WWF's bread and butter. Did that play a factor in it as well? They really wanted to kind of give them the big push, like, okay, you're going to win in our home, basically home base.
I don't remember what the thought process. I had forgotten that the title change was that quick, and it kind of reminds me of an era, several decades before that when Buddy Rogers became champion in Madison Square Garden, and he won the title in something like 24 seconds or something, not quite as quick. And in that case, I remember that the promotion at the time, I think, felt that if he won the title that quick, that a lot of the people would maybe the fans might look at it as being just a fluke, that he wasn't really a superstar at that level. And there are some promoters that would say, okay, he's going to be the champion, but he's going to do it real quick, and almost with I don't know how to say this the right way, but if it was a guy that sometimes was, a little bit of a struggle to do business with him, there are promoters that say, okay, well, you're going to go out and win the title in like 30 seconds, and there's that risk that the people will not believe it because it was so quick. And that's a way of taking a guy who was maybe becoming difficult. And I'm not saying that Kevin was, but there have been cases where a guy was difficult, and I think, okay, you win the title real quick, and you got the belt, but the fans aren't accepting you as a champion because they don't feel that you've earned that level, and it can actually be used as a way of taking the wind out of the sails of some talent.
And that was, of course, Bruno beating Buddy Rogers in 48 seconds. And I think Buddy Rogers may have been being a bit difficult, and Vince Sr. definitely wanted to get the title on Bruno at that point. Obviously, the issue with Backlund wouldn't be like that, right? I mean, they just wanted Diesel to try to look strong. And
talking of the Rogers situation, and I spent a lot of time with Buddy. He was, he was a very charismatic figure. He had been a cop at one time in Camden, New Jersey, and I was from Trenton. And so when Buddy ascended and reached that level, became champion, he was friends with Bob Orton Sr. Bobby Davis was the manager. Mm-hmm. I remember Chief Bigheart. I remember Haystacks Calhoun, Bobo Brazil. The depth of talent in that era was just unbelievable. And there were people that maybe thought that Buddy winning the title real quick, the fans wouldn't accept him because it was such a quick victory, and there were some promoters that thought, okay, we'll make you the champion real quick, and then all of a sudden you'll find out that maybe you weren't the huge star that you thought you were. And as crazy as it sounds, it could be part of a plan where certain promoters would be able to control some guys by putting them in an awkward situation like that. Now,
the WWF in this period, I wouldn't say it's a total killer period with the new generation, but it definitely is a downswing from the Hogan era. There's no doubt about that. I mean, when you lose basically, the biggest star in the business, it's not really going to probably trend upward. It's going to trend down, but it wasn't dying per se. I mean, it's still doing good business, and just was down from the business, obviously, that Hogan and that guy, that era kind of did it, and the Macho Mans of the world and stuff like that. But as far as the Kliq and having backstage power, I always thought it was kind of crazy that they were kind of wielding some backstage power. And you hear a lot of stories of them not controlling Vince, but Vince having to go down to Indianapolis and having a meeting with them, and them kind of controlling Vince in certain ways. It's kind of hard to believe in certain aspects, because if the business isn't great, how could these guys have so much political power? I mean, am I kind of going maybe too into the weeds there? Am I making sense on that?
Absolutely. And a guy gets a chance. A guy like Diesel gets a chance to become champion and to carry the load for a while. He's going to do better financially, but it also gives him more power. And the promoters would be reluctant to make a guy champion if they thought that they didn't still have a significant amount of control over that individual. I mean, you didn't want to put a guy out there, if you were a promoter, and give him that opportunity, and then all of a sudden have him be just totally impossible to deal with, and where you would regret that, oh boy, this wasn't such a good idea. I'm sorry that I put the title on him, and then figure a way that as soon as possible to get it off him, so that the promoters always wanted to be in control, which is understandable, and they they considered or controlled the purse strings, and it's a crazy, crazy business, and everybody wanted to get to that top level. And I remember being, and I could think of the guy's name, and I wouldn't want to mention it because I wouldn't want to embarrass him. But there was a guy in Amarillo who, would look at guys who were above them on the card, and he would kind of be a dressing room. I don't know. I can't even think of the right word to use it, but he would be somebody that they complained a lot and made it clear that he thought that he was being held back, and this happened a lot of times where the booker also was at the top of the card and making top money. And if you're a promoter, and I don't want to single Dusty out and use him as an example, but it's hard not to. But if you have a territory, and Charlotte would have been a great example, a territory that everything is cyclical, and if there's a time where the cycle is down, and the business is crazy. It's like when the cycle is down, it seems from a creative standpoint that no matter what you do or what you think may have been successful somewhere else or whatever is going to be what's going to kickstart your business and your houses, and you make an effort to give that, whether it's one guy or a tag team, an opportunity, and then for whatever the reason, it doesn't happen. And I saw that a lot too. But the same token, there are times where there's a guy there who has the, he's got all the qualities. Is maybe not charismatic like some other people to that degree, but still an asset on the card. And all of a sudden, because of, you hear the statement about being in the right place, the right time, and a guy will be somewhere where somebody gets hurt and is off the road for a while, and all of a sudden it creates an opportunity for another guy that was, maybe one step, two steps down from that top echelon, and all of a sudden this guy gets that chance, and he goes out there and just shocks the whole world. And I call it that it factor. And if for somebody that spent over half a century of his career in the business, if I could somehow be able to predict with 100% credibility that something was going to be a success, whether it was an individual, a tag team, or a program, I'd be living in a mansion somewhere, and not that I have any complaints about where I am at this stage of my life, but I mean, if you had the ability to just know with 100% certainty that everybody that you anointed for an opportunity was going to not only live up to your expectations, but so far exceeded, and those guys just, it's a crapshoot. There's a guy that you think has everything going for him and has all of the qualities. He has the size, he has the attitude, he can interview, and you put him out there and you put him at that upper level, and all of a sudden it's the fans are the judge and jury, and you go out there expecting that he's going to blow the roof off the business and the territory, and you do okay, but not anywhere near what you thought you were going to do with that individual given that push and that opportunity. And that's what makes this business so unique, because if any one individual was 100% right from the creative standpoint as to who they were going to bring in to a territory or give the big push to, this business would be an awful lot easier. But even with somebody like Diesel, now he paid off because he was a big guy, got the opportunity, went out there. But there are other guys that were big guys that were put in a similar situation that it didn't happen, and you don't know often until you actually have to make the commitment and give it a try, and then maybe the initial response isn't what you thought it was going to be, but you keep pushing it to give him every opportunity to succeed, and then after a period of time you realize that for whatever the reason you weren't getting the results from that particular individual, that given his size, his experience in the business, his athletic ability, just again, there's that it factor that the fans are the judge and jury on.
Do you remember Vince having to go to Indianapolis or maybe some house shows or something to kind of wrangle in the Kliq, and kind of basically they're kind of yielding too much power, and they're not up to no good, but maybe they're doing something politically, maybe they shouldn't. Do you remember at all Vince having to kind of step in and be like, all right guys, what is going on, what are you guys up to, you know what I mean, like basically kind of corral them?
I'm not saying that never happened, but I don't have a specific recollection of them being individuals or a group that were so high maintenance that Vince was having to go to towns that he otherwise wouldn't have. I mean, Vince would always go to places where you had TV or a big show, and he was always at the Garden. But some guys, and Vince was very, very smart. He knew that certain guys had to be massaged at that level, maybe given a little bit more open access to Vince than some other guys wouldn't. They would, go to TV, and they would go in for a private meeting with Vince and maybe be in there for 45 minutes, and where other guys and guys would be waiting outside. They'd have a row of chairs to have their few minutes with Vince to either discuss a problem or wanting some direction on where their character was going. It's a business that was simplistic in many ways, but complex in so many other ways. And especially, if you're one guy and all you have to worry about is your own career, it's that can be frustrating at times. But when you're somebody who is on the creative side that has to look at the whole roster, and I think I've said this before too, that you pretty well, to be as successful at that level in creative, you have to learn pretty quick of which guys, when they need a little bit of straightening out or a little bit of motivation. Some guys, it can be a boot in the butt, and other guys, you couldn't do that. You have to be more gentle with a pat in the back. And it's at that level, you have to learn who has to be treated in certain ways to get the maximum benefit out of them and keep peace and harmony in the locker room.
Do you remember any problems or issues with them? Because I obviously you're doing talent relations, you're dealing with a lot of different talents. Do you remember any problems? Like obviously a Bulldog would joke around or call him the Kliq, and then Luger kind of really created the moniker the Kliq. But do you have any kind of recollection or memories of them really causing problems?
No, not really. And I was very fortunate in that, and I think I was blessed with the personality of being able to get along with everybody on the talent roster, from the guy that was in the opening match or the first couple of matches that was going out there and working hard and knowing that you had to keep him motivated, but also realizing that was going to be his niche in your roster, that he was never going to get up to the top. But you never want to have a talent feel that it is impossible for them ever to get to that level. because that's what motivates a lot of them, is to think that they're going to go out there and work really hard, or invest in a new ring outfit or something to help themselves to get. And a lot of times it happens the old right place, the right time. A key person suffers an injury, and where they are on the card, I mean, you it's not like you can then take and groom somebody for 2 or 3 months. You have to have somebody that you can immediately elevate, that you have some confidence in, that can step into that position. And a lot of times that's how opportunities happen for guys that then seize that opportunity, go out there and make the effort, so that they show that that you're giving them that opportunity was a good decision. And eventually, if they prove that they can be a commodity at that level, then they stay at that level. And maybe when they go to another territory, word spreads, that this guy, they gave him a chance and he went out there and wow, he just was the right place, the right time. So-and-so got hurt. He jumped in there and just far exceeded anybody's expectations. And so that opens doors for him when he goes to another territory to come in at a higher level because of his track record.
Razor Ramon, a.k.a. Scott Hall, another member of the Kliq, probably the senior member. I believe he's the oldest member of the group. But I guess technically Nash, since he was a world champion, would almost be decreed the leader of the group. But I feel like Ramon is kind of the real leader, the real starter of the group. Like maybe like the lead voice. Or, a lot of the, Shawn and Triple H get a lot of different things. I don't know if he realizes through their career they get it from Scott Hall, or not steal it, but they kind of borrow it from Hall and do different things that he did. And he was kind of the cool one before the other ones were recognized as being cool. What are your kind of thoughts on Razor Ramon, especially at that point in the WWF?
I remember, I can close my eyes, I can see him. He had that black spit curl in his forehead, and he used to have a toothpick in his mouth, and he just and some guys, it's a persona that they morph and finally get to a comfort level where they become that person. And I think they have to become that person to go out there and have success at the absolute highest level. It can't be, in other words, it was in there all along, but they just had to be the right place, the right time, and have the opportunity for that part of them to emerge and come out. And then you can't always predict it as to if that person has the ability. There was one guy in particular who, I was in Amarillo, and there was a guy who was a good solid mid-card guy who just complained constantly that he was being held back, that he saw himself as a top guy, and to the point that it became a little bit of a distraction on the talent roster. And I remember saying, well, we're going to give this guy a push and just see where it goes. He in his own mind thinks that that's where he should be. And I remember in Amarillo, Albuquerque was the big town. And so which you could push a guy, because they did TV in Albuquerque with live interviews in the studio, which some of the others were done on tape and sent to the towns. But in Albuquerque, it was done live every week, because Mike London, who was the promoter, and I think it hits a town. It was the best town in the territory where you made the most money. Mike London was he had a bar, and Mike Padusis was a bartender, an old-retired wrestler, and Mike London would do his where you would have like a professional announcer doing the interview segments for all the other towns in Albuquerque. If you worked Albuquerque, even if you were in Colorado the night before and were 250, 300 miles away, plus you had to drive from Amarillo to get to Albuquerque or get to Colorado and then into Albuquerque, and the TV would come on at 9 in the morning. Now, the TV would be the show that you would bicycle around, that started in Amarillo first. The only difference would be where you would do promos for all the other towns and then insert them on tape and send them to the towns. Mike London wanted to do all of his own. He bought the whole hour to start with, and he was unique in that he did not put out posters. He put no newspaper ads, and you didn't know, if as a wrestling fan, what the matches were, including the main event in Albuquerque that night, until 9 o'clock in the morning on Sunday when you tuned in and Mike London came on and told you what the card was that night. And I remember it's like doors open at 6 o'clock, first bell at 7. And in between the matches, which is where you would have commercials, and in the other towns is where you would put your like event centers to promote the live events for whatever that market was. Those interviews were all done live in Albuquerque, and Mike London did the interviews. And it would be so frustrating because I was never the biggest or the best in terms of physical, but I had a very, very successful career. And it was in part to that I worked very, very hard, gave all every night, because that's what I had to do to stay on top. And I put a lot of time and a lot of effort into my interviews, and wanted my interviews. I realized to be at that level, I had to do interviews that were a little bit different than everybody else. And that involved a lot of thought. And with Mike London then doing the interviews live in Albuquerque, you would have a train of thought for a match that you had that night where you would have one of those, the 2-minute interview spots, and Mike would, you'd have this, like, I was always a storyteller. So I would have my little story as to the importance to me for that match that night, and to get into, rather than just the thing about, trashing the babyface. And I always wanted my interviews to be different, and I would give a lot of thought as to how I was going to handle that interview. And I was used to being with an announcer that pretty much just did the lead in, talked about the show, and then pretty much held the microphone and let you carry it from there. But Mike London would do the lead in, and then you would start on a thing, and you'd have this thing of where you were going to go and build up your interview, and then right in the middle he would ask you some question that was totally not in sync with what you were saying. In other words, he'd ask you some silly question that would break your train of thought. And, oh my God. And it was so frustrating. But the funny part of it is that was the best town in the territory where you made the most money. So how could I say that I could say it was wrong, because Mike London was there doing the interviews. That was his style. And you were never going to change him. So you had to be flexible enough to say, well, I had this whole thought in mind of what I was going to do, and a third of the way in it, all of a sudden Mike asks me something or makes a comment that just completely derailed the direction I was going. Now I've got to on the fly adjust to it. But like I say, it was the best town in the territory, and where you made the most money.
Love it. Now, as far as best town in the territory, WWF style would definitely be New York. And thinking of New York, obviously we mentioned it before, Madison Square Garden. And May 19th, 1996, I don't know if you'll remember this exact date, but you'll definitely remember what the story is. And that is, of course, the infamous curtain call, the unscripted incident, if you will, that happened on that date where, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels basically go into business for themselves. And after their matches, they all hug in the ring. They break kayfabe. And it's captured actually by a fan on camera, and everyone's like, "Whoa, what the hell?" The heels and the faces are hugging in the ring. What's going on? They're breaking kayfabe. They're basically showing that they're friends. What were your thoughts?
And
this infamous night.
It all happened very spontaneous. There was no warning to it, because there was like a curtain in the back that you could like be back there and peek through the curtain, be able to see the ring. And on that given night, one of them was in a match, and then the match ended, and one of the guys went out there and joined him, and then all of a sudden another guy just walked past me and went out. Pretty soon the whole Kliq was in the ring, and I want to say it was an impromptu thing. I don't know that it was something that had been really thought out or planned. It just, because they pretty much would do whatever the moment dictated for them, and they would have no trouble when one guy was out there and he'd have a particularly good match or something happen, and two other guys would go out there to hug him and congratulate. That all of a sudden that would bring this great response from the crowd, and then the other guys that were part of the Kliq would go out there, and pretty soon they're all in the ring. And like you say, there were times where it would be a mixture of baby faces and heels, and you think, oh my God, they're killing the town, and they didn't. And I can't explain why. I guess it was that there was something magical about them that the fans just couldn't get enough of it and soaked it up. And for me, I was always lucky all through my career from the creative side, where I had to be working with guys with different temperaments, different egos, and to be successful from the creative side, you had to have a personality that could react to whatever the circumstances were and not be flustered by it or show frustration or lose your temper. That just never happened with me, because again, it was part of my personality that whatever happened, I was never going to let get the best of me. And thank goodness, because I ended up with a nice career when it was all said and done. As I've said, I got 2 Hall of Fame rings. That Hall of Fame when I first started as a 16-year-old in New Jersey. Hall of Fame was baseball in Cooperstown, and it was only later on that pro wrestling had the Hall of Fame, and the Horsemen in Miami in 2012 were inducted in as a group into the WWE Hall of Fame. And that was an incredible experience, because we had an outdoor show at the ballpark, and there were 60,000 people in that stadium. And we typically in wrestling didn't have, there aren't that many arenas. Even I think Madison Square Garden was maybe 20,000, 24,000, I don't remember, but to have 60,000 people in a ballpark sold out, and just the atmosphere that's generated. And I remember, looking up and seeing the third deck up, where at the end of the stage, people could look up, they could look down and see me, and at the end closest to where the stage was, I could see the people and they're up holding up the four finger symbol of excellence, and I'm holding four fingers and acknowledging him back. And of course, the people out in center field that were so far away I couldn't see, but the place was full, and that's something that you never forget, that those moments. That here is the wrestling ring in a situation like that with 60,000 people looks tiny in the middle of a stadium, and the people that are all the way up top in a sold-out arena, I guess they have to have binoculars to really appreciate whatever's going on in the ring, because there's nothing you could do. The ring is what it is. It's not going to be any bigger, and you're certainly not going to sell tickets to the 60,000 people that want to pay that could get in there to see whatever attraction that you're promoting at that time.
Now, as far as going back to the curtain call that night, you weren't mad at all that these guys are breaking character? Because this is kind of like the first time, really, like I can really remember, and I think a lot of the fans, that the baby faces, the heels, they just completely break character. They do whatever they want. Of course, Hall and Nash have no ramifications. They're not getting in trouble. That's their last night in WWF. They're about to head to WCW. What was kind of the thought? Was Vince mad? Were you mad? Like, what's the feel backstage for these guys doing this?
If I remember correctly, Vince wasn't there, and when it was a spontaneous. I want to say it was a spontaneous thing. Now maybe I don't think they had in mind that that's what they were going to do. It just kind of happened, and all of a sudden here's these guys out there that are all friends. You got heels and baby faces. And of course, my first thought is, worrying about protecting the business. That, oh my God, here's upper echelon guys, heels and baby faces together out there in the ring, hugging each other. And I thought, my God, we've built the business to the point that we've got these huge crowds, and because we always tried to protect the business. And now here they just on their own went out there, and it wasn't like you could go out there and grab somebody and halfway up the aisle and tell them to go back. I mean, it just was a situation that got out of control, and all you could do was just say, "Oh my God, I don't know how the fans are going to react to this. I hope and pray that it's not going to kill the town," and it didn't. And I can't explain why, whether it was the old school in me that thought that, heels and baby faces go out there and work hard in the ring to create heat and an atmosphere in a match where the crowd is conditioned to totally dislike one individual or one team, and then being cheered wildly for the other ones. And now here's these people who, yes, back in the dressing room, the people that are in the arena don't realize that they're all back there and they're all friends. And it's, you're thinking about protecting the business. And is this an expose? Because these guys just, I don't know. Don't they care? All the things that race through your mind, and and I still can't explain it to this day, that the fans responded for all of these guys and I think it's a tribute to the ability, talent-wise, of virtually the whole talent roster from opening match all the way up to the main events in that era, that they had the ability to go out there, and you would think, oh wow, the fans have seen all these guys in the ring at one time, and they're hugging each other, and how we this is going to kill the town. How are we ever going to get it back? And yet, on that same night, in a subsequent match, a guy goes out there who's a heel and gets the typical heel response. The babyface comes out there, the heel bails out of the ring, and it's like a scenario that we work so hard to create and work very hard to try and protect. And you think in a moment of them just not really thinking about what the consequences will be of all going in the ring and being there and embracing each other. And yet later on that same night, the people once again are conditioned to being angry and booing one guy and cheering and going crazy for the other guy. And to this day, I can't explain it, other than that I thought I had it all figured out, been around the business for half a century, and all of a sudden, I tell people this, that if you ever get to the point in the business where you've been around for a long time and you figure, well, I got it all figured out, you better pack your bags and go do something else, because you are never going to have it figured out. There are going to be nights like that just boggle the mind, that you can't explain how you can have people who are presented in a certain way on TV that go out there, get that response, and that they all go in the ring and they're embracing each other, and then there's intermission and they go out there, and now it's like that other scene earlier never happened. Now they're booing the one guy, and it's a tribute to the talent of the guys, because here they were cheering and just full of the moment. And after an intermission, there's a match where there's just two guys going out there, and if a heel is as good as he has to be at that level, it's to the point where you're almost about to get guys to come over the railing and in the ring because they're that angry with you.
Now, if you think about this, Hall and Nash leave, they go to WCW, they form the NWO, that completely takes off. Shawn Michaels, the WWF champion at that point, Vince is investing so much in him. He thinks he's the man. He's the main eventer. Bret Hart is gone for the time being. It's really the Shawn Michaels show as the Kliq is going to break up. They're going to divide and conquer, so to speak. Michaels is going to hopefully dominate the WWF, and then Hall and Nash dominate WCW. But it doesn't quite work out that way for the WWF. Shawn Michaels, if you look at it business-wise, one of the worst champions, really, money-wise and business-wise and ratings-wise, in WWF history. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that, because years later, the way he's presented, the way he's perceived and pushed and stuff, I mean, great wrestler, great talent. But at that point, Hogan turns heel, joins Hall and Nash at the NWO, and they just completely crush the WWF. To the point where, it's talking about bankruptcy, talking about this. Obviously, as well, pay cuts going on, this and that. So Shawn Michaels as champion, is that just on the fact that Hall and Nash and the NWO and Hogan took off so much, or is that kind of a detriment against Shawn Michaels as champion that he did not draw well at all?
Well, Shawn, when he first came there, came with Marty Jannetty as the Rockers.
Mm-hmm.
So his first exposure with the WWE was as a tag team wrestler, and he eventually split away. And given his another one similar to that would be Bret Hart. If you saw some of the other guys in the dressing room and Bret Hart was there, he wouldn't stand out as a superstar. And I would say the same thing about Shawn Michaels. But they had that, again, I come back to you'll hear me say it time and time again, that it factor. Can't explain it. Guys either had it or they didn't. And it could be very frustrating for somebody who had been in the industry for half a century and working on the creative side. It's like it would be frustrating to say, well, God, why couldn't I have predicted that that's what this guy was going to be? But it is so unpredictable. And it's that thing that that the fans are, and it's true, they're the ultimate judge and jury, and they are going to determine what it is. And you could try to help by, pushing a guy on TV or giving him opportunities and putting him in the right place, or giving him a rub with somebody who was already an established star and move a guy up. But it's a crazy, crazy business. And so many of the stars became stars because the fans saw something in them that was unique, and it's the fans that made him a star, not because me or somebody else in creative, took a guy, I'm going to give him the opportunity, I'm going to help him spend some money on his ring attire and give him the big push. And there were people who tried that and it failed miserably, and somebody that was just there, that you didn't have what you thought was the ideal opponent for him at that time, all of a sudden goes out there, and you realize within a week or two, these fans are in love with that guy, and we need to capitalize on that and get with a program, and never could have anticipated that was going to be the case.
Yeah. And what about Michaels at that point in 96? He was definitely like, oh, everything points to him being a top champion, and then boom, just not drawing well at all.
Yeah. I can't explain it. And there have been cases where guys were big stars in one place and then could never have that same level of success going to other areas. Didn't always happen. In fact, it was less likely rather than more likely, because there's that intangible it factor that the guys that are true superstars in our industry have, that thing that I can think that I see it coming and give them every opportunity to excel, but it's not a guarantee that it's going to happen. I have to just be vigilant and watching, and when I see that the fans see something and in a particular individual, it would be sheer stupidity on my part to say, oh well, I should have figured this out, not the fans, so I'm just not going to go with the program. That would have been total stupidity on my part. When a guy goes out there that you didn't see that with them initially, and they go out there and become and far exceed anything that you ever thought they could do and become huge stars, you ride the train with them. You don't say, oh, well, I'm mad at these people because I should be able to pick out and determine who's a star, not the people. When you're in creative, that if you ever get where you take it personal, that I'm not going to get behind a guy just because the fans are behind him, you're in the wrong business. You just have to be paying attention, and when it happens, recognize it, and then get on that train and be a part of it.
It's interesting what Michaels called his fans the Kliq. I just always thought that was interesting, and didn't really go over too well, but they always said the Kliq cam and stuff like that. I just thought that was kind of funny. It's like the real Backstage name of the group is the Kliq, and he's calling his fans the Kliq. I don't know if you remember that. I just always found that kind of funny. Yeah,
and I guess I was blessed with a temperament that I never had a problem with any of those guys, because if they're going out there and being successful, even if it was something of their own doing that the fans embraced and took off with, I'm there to just recognize that situation, and God forbid it would be counterproductive of me to say, well, this wasn't my idea, or I think somebody else over here is more deserving or better, or God, I think they look better and everything. If you're on the creative side and have that kind of a mindset or attitude, I could tell you from the get-go you're going to fail, and it's a tough enough business without making it tougher on yourself than it has to be.
There's such like interesting rumors and stuff about Michaels at the time and why he was champ, and it could be a lot of bitterness and some wrestlers. Who knows if it's really true or if it's just crazy rumors and stuff. But they always say like, "Oh, Michaels wasn't drawing that well, but yet he always had Vince's ear. Michaels wasn't doing too hot, and the ratings weren't going good against WCW and the NWO, but he continually got a push, and he was always in Vince's ears and stuff." Was there any sort of anything odd or anything as far as HBK and Vince? Because that is kind of a weird thing that he's not really drawing that well, but yet he's getting the push, he's getting the political power.
Yeah.
But was there anything between them? Because it always seemed like it is true that Michaels always had Vince's ear.
Yeah, I think Kevin Nash was the one that I saw just nurtured a relationship with Vince, and he was everything that Vince admires in a wrestler in the terms of his height, his size, and so if you looked and say, well, who is Vince going to be the most excited to be successful, Shawn Michaels or Kevin Nash? Logic would tell you, if you've been around Vince for any length of time at all, it would be Kevin Nash. Because, Vince always trained hard himself and wanted to be the best physical specimen that he could be. And he trained hard. He did. And he admired guys that had that same mindset. I was somebody that to this day, I think if I walked into a gym, they would say, "Can I help you? You lost. Get out of here." My whole career, I never went to a gym, never. And I didn't. The only thing that I did, and I attribute that to an old timer, Art Nelson. And Art was he was gruff, and he was had no patience for people that he thought did stupid things, which a lot of young wrestlers do stupid things. And he was into saving his money, made a lot of trips by himself because he just didn't have patience with guys that he just would shake his head and not have much respect for. And when I got to Charlotte, like I say, I was almost 28 years old, so I was a little bit older, and kept my mouth shut. A lot of young guys, they get in the business for a little bit, and all of a sudden, if you're somewhere where, you're talking over a match with your opponents, and young guys will all of a sudden speak up and want input, and some of the old timers resented that. They didn't, you had to earn their trust, and it took time to get to the level where you could, speak up and express your opinion. And again, like I said, I was almost 28 years old when I started. So I was just so happy to be living my dream. And at 28, almost 28 years old, being a full-time wrestler for the first time in my career. And I sometimes, will lay in bed at night and I think, I was 6 months from my 28th birthday when I started full-time as a wrestler. And after 20 years of being active, I look back because I kept records for tax purposes. And there was a week at a glance book that has 1 week at a time, and I would write the town and how many miles, and if there were tolls, and if I stayed over in a hotel, what my expense was, and I would write down later on as a manager, I just put manage, or if I wrestled, so I could always look back for if I had wrestled the guy So it had a dual purpose, but I could look back and see if I'd wrestled somebody else in that town the previous show, and if I won, lost, DQ, whatever, and not to the degree that Jim Cornette kept records, but a similar idea. And I kept all those week at a glance books, and at the end of the year when I was doing my taxes, at the end of each week I would write at the top the mileage for that week that I traveled, and then I would write what my gross pay was for the week. And so when I was doing it, I could sit down and with a sheet of paper and just have 52 entries with the miles that I traveled, and I could quickly with a little calculator be able to know how far I traveled to be able to claim mileage, because we used to carpool, but for tax purposes I would put down every night that the mileage and tolls and whatever as if I drove to the town by myself every night. And you almost had to do that in order to not give the government all the money. And I never got audited, but I thought if I do, okay, this is where I was. You can see on the advertising I was there, and this is how the mileage. And they weren't out saying, well, let me see your card. Let me go see what the odometer reading is. Well, according to that, you should have triple that mileage on your odometer, and you've had this car for a while. No, that never happened. I mean, did I ever think that could happen? Probably in the beginning I did, but after a while, that's how you didn't give all the money to the government by carpooling. I might drive every third day, and two guys go with me, and then another day and somebody else would drive. And also, I would drive and I look in the mirror and the guys in the back seat are out cold, getting sleep. And if you had to drive every town every day, there would have been a lot more wrecks and a lot more deaths on the highway. So it was a unique business.
That is for sure. And eventually, you would follow Hall and Nash to WCW with a little bit of help from Hall and Nash and kind of get in the door there.
Yeah.
Was it surprising to you? Like you mentioned, when you were 28 and you wouldn't kind of necessarily knock on the promoter's door and go in and talk. Were you surprised at all that like a guy like Nash or Michaels, who were pretty young, not really young to the business, but probably around your age at this point, if you think about it, that they would just walk into Vince's office and just talk to him? And I mean, is that just the times change in the business, or were you surprised at all how like easily and openly they would just talk to Vince about their problems?
Times changed, and and it wasn't like I thought my role was threatened because they're going in and having one-on-one with Vince. I had enough things to do that I didn't look at it as all of a sudden Vince saying one day, well, why am I have this person here? I can meet with these guys, because it wasn't like Vince had to meet with everybody at every show. There were only certain guys that developed a relationship with Vince, and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were two of them. And then, of course, Shawn Michaels later on. Bret Hart would be another one that, that had a closer relationship with Vince because of where they were on the card and the money that they drew and enjoyed a certain status.
I think that's probably a good kind of stopping off point, a good ending point for this conversation.